My name is Aladdin Ayesh, and it is my pleasure to present to you today our research work concerning the assessment of empathic systems, especially in the context of recent advances in generative and conversational AI. In this presentation, we look at some motivating facts that we can observe in the advances AI systems are enjoying nowadays with a greater reach into our daily lives. Once our motivating reasons are covered in the introduction, we swiftly move to a brief introduction of the relevant areas to our topic, namely generative AI, large language models, and empathic AI. We then present our work in designing experiments to examine possible testing of generative empathy. To conclude, we present a review of the work, some future work, and then we finish the presentation with an open-ended research question. We can observe the increased use of AI-enabled domestic systems, which has led to increased need for socially aware interactive interfaces, which in turn brought into focus the impact of such systems on human psychology and behavior. In this presentation, our focus is on the interaction between generative AI and empathy-able systems. And in our work, we attempt to answer the question, how can we assess such systems in the context of the current advances in generative AI? Generative AI is reshaping industries by enabling machines to autonomously create content and solutions, boosting productivity in many areas. One of the areas where generative AI made great advances is in understanding, manipulating, and generating textual content. This is commonly known as large language models due to the large network structures the generative algorithms build from the training corpora. These systems have enabled a new generation of conversational AI exhibiting remarkable accuracy and high fidelity in interactional responses. With these capabilities, emotional content and subsequently empathic responses have emerged, but to what degree? In this paper, we delve into the requirements and the potential approaches that can be followed in testing the empathic capabilities of generative AI and large language models based on currently available systems. Large language models are not trained to specifically respond with empathic content. Any such content would be a response to a prompt. Thus, we conducted initial random tests to ascertain the degree of empathic responses that may be generated from existing large language models-based systems. These initial tests were conducted using ChatGPT 3.5. There is an example on the slide from these initial tests. To examine the degree of the empathic response, we changed the relationship between the user and the system to examine the potential of triggering a response with higher level of emotional and empathy content. Some of the results showed such a potential once key factors are identified. From the initial tests, we identified the three factors that influence the empathic or emotional content of the responses received. These factors are the context of the prompt, the emotional content, and the machine relationship content within the prompt used. We designed an experimental setup to systematically test readily available large language models. The experimental setup relied on using existing trained large language models. In other words, we used ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.0. To standardize the process, we borrowed from emotion models, especially Watson Basic Emotions and Melanson model, both of which became the basis for the development of computational models of emotions. These models gave us the triangular framework of positive, negative, and neutral representation that we use in the paper. Thus, empathic activating words to be used in prompts were limited to the following: positive, happy, keen, excited, and determined; negative, annoyed, worried, angry, fearful; and neutral, warm, determined, bland, acting. Similarly, we designed the relationship content with the empathic activating words limited to three possible options: positive as a friend, negative as a foe, neutral as a computer. In the first case study, we adopted a neutral to positive subject area, providing a relatively neutral context. We first tested the optional content, and almost all answers started by acknowledging the emotional state of the user, followed by practical advice consisting of a list of practical steps to be taken. We then introduced the human-machine relationship expressed in the three forms aforementioned: as a computer, as a friend, as a foe. In the second case study, we adopted a subject area most people would find emotional and would likely to trigger strong empathic reactions. We then introduced the human-machine relationship content. This case study demonstrated the impact of context on the quality of empathy expressed in responses, especially to the emotional content of the prompts. The degree of empathy was amplified by the emotional content and by the human-machine relationship in this context. In reviewing our findings, we can conclude some observations. First, a suitable degree of empathy was expressed in responses, especially to the prompts of the second case study. ChatGPT 4.0 exhibited more professional tone in almost all responses, except in one. ChatGPT 3.5 exhibited a mix of responses, but often acknowledged the emotion expressed in the prompt early in the response. We certainly need further examination to examine the link between the size of the trained model and the level and quality of the exhibited empathy. Thus, there is still a lot of work to be done to confirm these results, taking into consideration the various possible prompt design. For example, the use of enemy instead of a foe produced slightly different results. The use of please advise as and omitting the please advise phrase from the prompt also led to variations in answers. The follow-up research will require larger experimental sets with a wider range of large language models. However, the most pressing question concerns the nature of the empathic responses that generative AI is capable of producing. To present it as a research question, we can ask, can we establish beyond a doubt that empathy is or can become an emergent characteristic that evolves through language learning as exhibited by generally trained large language models? To conclude, we have looked at some of the motivating reasons for our work and introduced the relevant areas to our research. This was followed by a summary of our experimental work on the potential of testing generative empathy. We concluded with some observations and an open ended research question. Thank you for listening to our presentation today and look forward to hearing from you. Please do not hesitate in contacting us if you have any comments or questions. Thank you.